Welcome to the Tailwind Marketing Podcast, where we talk to IT marketing leaders about how to drive more sales. Hosted by Carlos Corredor, founder of Corredor, an Inc. 5000 company and one of the fastest growing IT marketing agencies in the US.
3, 2, 1, 0.
This episode is brought to you by Corredor, a digital marketing agency for mid-market B2B and tech services companies. Most B2B marketing teams struggle to drive sales, overwhelmed by long sales cycles and an elusive audience. Corredor helps you measure and generate qualified opportunities, make the most with your budget, and be recognized as a revenue driver and not just a cost center. You can learn more at condoragency.com. So we want to welcome Paige Galley. Paige is the marketing director at Prime Secure, which is an IT and security solutions provider based in Nebraska, in Omaha. She has spent over 10 years in the tech industry, in marketing, starting her career in design and creative roles, and more recently moving towards leadership in lead generation and performance marketing. So, we'll be talking about the merge of those two. So welcome, Paige.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be a part of this conversation.
Anything else about you, before I start asking you questions about marketing, anything else we should know about you?
I don't think so. I think you've pretty much captured it.
One area that Paige was explaining she's been focusing on a lot is how saturated this market is, especially obviously in solutions that have been going for a while, and the importance of having a clear value proposition, to differentiate yourself. She was saying that in Omaha, for example, when you Google an IT managed service provider, you see 10, 15 companies in the first page, all of them doing almost essentially the same thing, right? So let's get into it. Paige, tell us, what's your philosophy on differentiating and
Yeah, certainly. So I, of course, think it's always a developing philosophy. You might have to try some things out and make changes as you go. But yeah, just to touch on that very specific example, especially in the IT space, it's a growing market. They pop up everywhere. And so being able to really differentiate yourselves, I think, is a really important conversation to have. And I think a lot of times, if you were to ask a company, how are you different from your competitors? I think the go-to answer for a lot of organizations is it's our people. It's our people that make a difference. And yes, that may be true. And you probably have wonderful employees. But if everyone is saying that, and that's everyone's go-to, this is what makes us different, it's not really making you different from your competitors. So it's got to be something where you can have a really great, value proposition statement, and it sounds fantastic. Okay, but how are you proving that? And how is it really different? And how is it specific? And so I think that's really important to capture that. And I also want to mention, you can have, you probably have different audiences and different personas. And so having a value proposition that speaks to each of their personas is also important to identify. And so I think, it has to be, and I guess in my experience, something that is very specific. So for example, if you are in the managed IT space, if your value proposition, we answer on the first ring, that's a very specific thing. That's very measurable. It speaks to your customer service rather just, saying we have excellent customer service. Okay, well, how? Well, we always answer a phone call on the first ring. You're guaranteed to talk to a person. That's like a very specific thing to incorporate into your value proposition. And so I think, you have the core of, what is important to your organization, obviously what the benefits you are bringing to your prospects, but then how can you measure that and how can you provide proof to your customers and prospects. So again, just kind of using that example, if customer service is your value proposition because your people are great, because your people are wonderful, rather than saying, we're different from our competitors because our people are wonderful. You can say our people are wonderful, our customer service, we excel, and we guarantee that if you give us a call, we're going to answer on the first ring. You're going to talk to a human. Or, to expand on that, it could be, we will resolve, your problem will be resolved in 10 minutes. Like that, just a very, very specific measurable. You might have kind of a generic, framework of your value proposition, but then creating a very, very specific measurable that shows proof of the value that you are providing.
Yeah, no, it's completely agree with you. When we started the agency, we also struggled a little bit on what was, really our differentiator. No, I think like it has to be true,
Yeah.
self, you need to be able to back it up. It's also need to be valued by the market, and I think most companies understand they need to differentiate, but I think most of them don't go to that second layer, right? Maybe they do two areas. I think everybody does that, right? But I don't think everyone necessarily either knows how to really defend each area or each differentiator, or they don't know how to explain it, right? When we started, like I knew, for example, for us, I knew that analytics was a differentiator because of my background and everything. But really, like all of the agencies out there, it's very rare that you find an agency that tells you that they're not data driven and that they don't care about the numbers, everyone says, they're data driven and analytically driven and ROI driven. But then, okay, that's not differentiating you by definition, right? So when a client asks you, okay, how are you data driven? Well, okay, we won awards for, let's say, our report, right? Or more than half of our client services team have a STEM degree, or we have X number of data scientists, in our marketing services teams. Then you start getting into the details that are really hard to replicate by the rest of the agency. So I completely agree. And and how many differentiators you think there should, what's too many and what's not enough?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Honestly, I think it kind of goes back to the persona that you're speaking to. Different buyer personas are going to have different needs. For our organization, we have two main buyer personas. We have an IT resource within a company that we could be speaking with. And then we also have an owner, at the end of the day, the official decision maker. So they might have some very different concerns compared to the IT resource. And so creating a value proposition that can speak to those two different personas, certainly you can have like a blanket value proposition. But at the end of the day, the IT resource has different concerns compared to the business owner. And so creating a value proposition to each of those personas, I think is critical. If you have 5 personas within your organization, again, I think creating a proposition that speaks to them directly. I don't necessarily think, in terms of like, if you're thinking of bulletless items, is there going to be a minimum or a maximum? I wouldn't put your value proposition into a box like that. In my perception, I think it's important to just make it specific to the persona. So, if you were trying to capture everything that your solution provided to all of your different personas, that may look like a very long proposition, and it may be a little bit too lengthy. But if you're being very specific to those personas, I don't think that you would run into that issue where it's like, oh, do I have enough? Do I have too much? I think if it's specific, I think if it speaks to them, I think if it demonstrates the value that they're going to receive, then you've captured it.
And how do you think it gets complex when it's like 5%, right? But let's say,
Yeah.
let's summarize it, or for this example, for this exercise in two, right? One is, let's say, more technical person, maybe the one for the solution in the first place. And then maker, let's say, is more like the CIO or something, someone more at the executive level, right? So obviously the first one, again, more technical use cases, and then the second more benefits for the organization, more strategic points of view, and more of a vision. But then obviously, if you're gonna do a cold outreach campaign for the first one, you're gonna focus on that. Or if you're gonna sit and have a meeting with the decision maker, you're gonna focus more on the latter. But like, how about your website? Yeah, your homepage, the above fold, right? Like, where do you decide when to put each, when you don't really know what person is going, what
Sure.
other persona is going to read it?
Sure. That's an excellent point. In that situation, I would say there's probably going to be like a core kind of, I guess I like to call it like a core framework of your offering. And that could be applied to each of your personas. So it could be, our customer service is, really important across all of our personas. That's a common theme. So that could be something that you do list on a website. If it could speak to each persona, I think it would make sense to incorporate that onto your webpage. Depending on different campaigns that you're running and things like that, you might have different lead magnets that are set up to speak to those different personas. And that's where you could be a little bit more specific. But I think there's going to be those general themes that you can absolutely incorporate into your value proposition that could just be listed on your homepage.
And okay, so I think what I'm hearing is, number one, to be successful at explaining your value proposition differentiator, number one, you have to do it by personas. You cannot do it at a company level. You have to do it you have to really know your ICP and how many personas, and then do it at that level. What else? In terms of, for example, creativity, copywriting, like any thought or any other area, like what would be another important thing to take into account, to have a successful differentiation?
Yeah, I think being able to explain it in a way that can be measured, right? So kind of going back to the example that I used, if your differentiator is your customer support, your responsiveness, that's great. So externally, how are you going to convey that? And having very specific ways to convey that. Maybe it's measurables, maybe it's credentials on your team, very specific things that you can then prove that, rather than just without saying, just saying, we have wonderful people and our customer service is excellent. That's great, but how? And showing that and demonstrating how it is.
Yeah, I think it's just like, it's, if somebody is trying to go out with you on a date and they just say, I love you to the moon and back. Okay, nice to hear, but what exactly? You want to hear the details, what sparks your interest on that. What exactly do you like about me, or what exactly have you enjoyed, and what exactly do you want to do more, right? Otherwise, it's just cheap talk. There's a lot of cheap talk in the dating world and also in the marketing world.
Yeah, exactly. And I also think, taking into consideration feedback from existing customers to refine it even more, as I mentioned at the, beginning of the conversation. I don't think your value proposition is just, this is what we've defined and it's never going to change. You can adapt it as you get feedback, or even if you're explaining what your value proposition is and you're in a prospect meeting, maybe it's not landing, maybe it's just not clicking with them, and understanding why. This has happened. I know with our organization, I'm sure with other organizations, you get to that point where you're presenting the proposal, right? So you've gone through all of the steps. You've had an intro meeting, you've done a network assessment. Now you're at the point where you're proposing them the solution, and they say no, and understanding why they said no. And a lot of the times, if they say no because of price point, then they didn't get it. They didn't get the value that you were offering if it's a price decision. And so being able to evaluate this, we got 90% of the way and it didn't click. Let's look at why were we not able to effectively communicate our value proposition and refining it. So I think that's important too. Just always tweaking it, looking at it, adjusting it as you maybe expand or you implement new things into your tech stack, like reevaluating it. How are we improving the offering itself? And so I think that's important, is just, continually evaluating it. If you lose a deal and looking at why you lost it, did the prospect just not, it didn't click for them? Why is that? And then also taking into account feedback from customers that did say yes, why was that the decision? What clicked for them? And just, constantly just tweaking it, looking at it and evaluating it.
Yeah, I love what you said about adjusting it not only on sales pitches, but also based on what your current customers are saying, right? Because if you've been able to show to your current customers that you've been working for years with, that they value one of the differentiators that you're claiming, it's probably not a differentiator for you if they haven't noticed it or are valuing it, right? So that should tell you something about going out there and using it as your first, for prospects. So balancing that, we actually changed some of our positioning based on what our clients, were telling us that they were valuing, right? And there's certain they were valued. For example, being a true extension of your team. It's something that we knew that we were doing, right? Like we were in their in their project management platforms in their teams and in Slack, and they have access to our team essentially 24/7, and they can ping me whenever, and they can have instant, they don't have to wait for a weekly meeting or even like for a day for an email reply, right? And we took for granted that all of other agencies were doing that, and when we started hearing it from every single of our clients, we said, okay, that is maybe even as powerful as, for example, analytics, which is the other one that I was saying, right? So we have to start preaching more how we do that. Anything else in terms of clear value proposition? Any other advice or common mistakes that you have seen?
Let's see here. I feel like I covered a lot of the, kind of common mistakes as far as maybe being a little too generic. I think maybe some helpful tips as you, refine it, or even maybe start from ground zero with developing one, is getting input from a variety of different positions within the organization. And then also from, like I said, customers. So, getting that feedback as you develop it, doing a workshop with, somebody that's at the CEO level, somebody that's at the sales position level, somebody that's actually out there deploying the services. I think having them in a workshop is important to, of course, for alignment. And then just, everyone hears different things. The people that are deploying the services will hear maybe something different from the customer compared to the salesperson. And so having those different levels as you form it or refine it. And then also, I think it's helpful to interview customers that you've won, understand why they chose you. And then if you've lost a deal that you felt like you really had it in the bag, I think interviewing them and understanding why you lost is also really an important part of that process. I know it can be kind of uncomfortable to ask or have maybe an interview like that or that conversation, but I do think that is really revealing. And it might be easier just to include people within your organization and customers you won. But I do think if you go back and ask somebody, why we lost this and have that interview, I think that will be incredibly, incredibly helpful.
Yeah, I agree. And it can seem uncomfortable if you think about it. Sometimes I get those emails, and I don't have a problem telling them, I appreciate the question, and I know B2B services world works. Like we also are B2B, so I don't mind, that they ask, hey, as long as it's not to continue to sell me, right?
Mm,
They ask you that.
right.
We already made a decision. Don't continue to push. I'm trying to,
Right.
truly to receive feedback. I don't think it should be uh too afraid, to bother the other person.
Mm,
Moving to now, so we talked about a value proposition. Now, talking about growing a marketing team, right?
mm,
Team and whether you are a one-person team or you manage 20 people and two agencies, right? And everything that goes
mhm.
from point A to point B there. You know, share with us again your philosophy on growing a marketing team. I don't want to bias you with further questions. I would love to hear your philosophy, and then I have some questions, but I want you to share
Sure.
your thoughts on there, on that.
Yeah, certainly. So I think, I started in the tech industry in my early 20s, so long time ago. And I think one of the, as a young marketer trying to prove my worth, I think one of the biggest mistakes that I made is I felt like I had to do everything. I had to do all the tactical stuff, content creation, social media, managing the CRM, hosting events, everything, the website management. I felt like I had to do everything. And I felt like if I didn't know how to do everything 100%, then as a marketer, I was a failure. And that has been one of the biggest lessons, that I've learned in terms of, growing a marketing team and just growing your marketing, in general. You don't have to have a huge team to grow your marketing. And so having the realization that, if you are in a position with your organization where you can hire, internally people to specialize in something, that is fantastic. That doesn't happen, all the time with small, medium-sized businesses. They have, a budget for a couple resources. And so trying to do everything in-house can be really daunting. And if you don't do everything 100%, you can feel like you're failing sometimes in your marketing strategy. So I think one lesson that I've definitely learned in the last 5 years, I'm a small team. Sometimes I have, two people. Sometimes it's just me. Sometimes I have a couple interns. But at the end of the day, we're a small team. And so I think knowing when you need to, reach out and get assistance and leveraging, other marketing firms, outsourcing things, I think that is completely fine in terms of, it's not going to be reasonable for every business to grow their marketing team, by 10 plus people. It's just not going to be reasonable, but you can still grow your marketing and you can still grow your marketing strategy without having to do that. And so I think knowing what you're good at, keeping that in-house, outsourcing things that you don't have expertise in, or, you have some knowledge, so you can make the decisions in terms of hiring the correct agency to outsource things. Having knowledge about that is important. You don't have to be in the weeds and expert of that. So in terms of, growing your marketing, I think that's really important, is to evaluate, where you're at, where you want to go, what's reasonable to keep in-house, and what do we need to outsource to really get to the next step. I think if, I know and I was definitely in this position, but some marketers can feel very protective of their marketing strategies, right? It can be a little nerve-wracking to invite an agency. You might feel like, oh my gosh, they're going to expose all these things that I'm not doing well. And I think, to get rid of that thought, and just, I know we need to start doing XYZ, but I know I don't have the tactical skills to do that. But I'm the head of this marketing team, so I need to find a way to do that. And if that's hiring somebody in-house, that's great. If that doesn't work within your budget, then finding a marketing agency that can fulfill that, I think is so important to growing your marketing strategy. And if you're stuck in that mentality of, I need to keep everything in-house, I need to be great at everything, I need to manage everything, you're going to plateau and you're going to be frustrated and your lead generation is going to plateau. And it's not going to be good for your personal or professional growth. And so I think that is just a huge misconception that marketers may have if they have a small team.
Right. Good point. I kept thinking that's an analogy. I love sports analogies. And for example, if you are young and you're playing competitive, like in my case, I play tennis, right? So if I was playing tennis, and if I thought that I was the number one in the world, without competing at a national level or at an international level, I'm just fooling myself, right? I don't think people think they are at the best in every marketing channel in the world. I don't think that's a problem, right? I think it's a mindset at work, that we hate to be, I don't know if evaluated, but definitely we don't want to feel exposed, or we don't
Right.
have somebody come in and tell us that what we're doing is a wrong way of doing it. I think it's okay, right? It's like when I'm 16, I need to play with an 18-year-old and get my ass kicked and know that's the only way I'm going to continue to improve, whether that's an individual level, a team level, like an organizational level. And I think the other thing that it's common is treating marketing as a commodity, right? Especially today, marketing is not a commodity. It's really complex. The tools, the technology is evolving by the minute. Yeah, the different channels. So you cannot truly believe that with the knowledge that you had either from college or in your first 2 years at the job or at a company, you're gonna be the best at every channel for every industry. So it's also, you need to be humble enough to recognize that and bring an expert. And then the other thing is the advantage of specialization, right? It's very tempting to say, okay, perhaps, obviously marketing agencies, especially in the US, they're expensive. It's very tempting to say, no, I'll just hire somebody. A marketing agency is going to charge me, I don't know, $10,000. I'll just hire somebody and have. But you are not taking into account that agency knows how to do that really well, right? So it's like you are going to end up paying more than you think when you're doing it internally. You have to train the person might quit. Whereas, with a person that knows how, that you're going to get it immediately. And the other factor is time is money, right? And then you're delaying progress of the marketing practice, because you're trying to do everything yourself, everything in-house. Okay, maybe the dollars invested would have been the same, but then you wasted 6 months and you still haven't done a campaign for that persona, or you still haven't done the 5 landing pages that you needed, right? So that's, I think, a big area that you need to be realistic about. Anything else there in terms of for example, how to balance? You mentioned certain roles, right? Like where you're good at, where you're not, right? Do you have any thoughts or recommendations on which type of roles or which type of responsibilities you should keep in-house versus what's easier or better to outsource?
That's a great question. I think it may just depend again on like the expertise of whoever is on your team. Like for us, like some very specific things that we like to outsource is SEO. And I am very passionate about SEO, and I have, SEO experience and capabilities. And I think I'm fairly competent in it. I could probably run with our SEO strategy. However, SEO is certainly a long game and there's a lot of different things that are involved. And so although I love that and I'm passionate about it, just in terms of the growth for our company, it made sense for us to look at outsourcing that to, you had mentioned earlier, your organization, it's like an extension of your team. So if you're able to outsource something like that to a team, essentially they are, an extension of of you, and they can help with that. So for us, SEO just made sense to pass that off to a team of people that are really, that's all they do. Like that's all that they're focused in. And so I think it might just depend on where you're at and what your strategy is. If, SEO and content marketing is part of your strategy, do you have the expertise and the bandwidth to get there? I think those are important questions to evaluate. If maybe you have the expertise, that's great. Do you have the bandwidth? Yes or no? Then I think that is, helpful in knowing to outsource things. And you could probably just apply those two questions to everything. Once you've determined what your strategy is, you could apply, expertise, bandwidth to everything and figure out what you're going to keep in-house, what you're going to outsource. Something that I think it's a lot of fun in general is, when you are working with an agency, they are an extension of your team. I think it's really fun to be in a position where you're able to think about, fun and unique strategies, or just creating fun and unique experiences for outreaching to prospects. And you can have that high level idea, and maybe you don't necessarily have the tactical know-how or abilities to get there, but having a team that has those expertise, you can let them know, this is what I'm thinking. I think this would be a lot of fun. How would we go about this? And then they can help kind of create that. And it just gives, for myself, the opportunity to grow more strategically. And, ultimately that's where I want to be in my career. Is I want to be, thinking strategically for marketing planning. I don't always want to be just tactically in the weeds doing the tasks. So being able to have that partnership, it's a lot of fun in that way. So coming up with new ideas, but maybe having, I don't necessarily know how to execute on this. What would you recommend? Having that feedback and that support is it's fantastic.
Yeah, one mistake that I see a lot is that from internal teams, that they're very easy, they're quick fire in open a new position for recruiting, and they don't usually do the homework of making sure that, first of all, it's a realistic skill set available in the market, right? Sometimes they want somebody that does paid search and email marketing and ABM and this and that, and like can create a landing page and do copywriting, and essentially they want 4 or 5 positions in one, right? So
Right.
152, make sure that once you're realistic for a position, you have enough workload there on a permanent basis, at least 1 year into the future, because otherwise, you don't need a full person for that. You might just tackle it as a project, with a freelance, a one-time thing, because nobody wants to be hiring and then firing people,
Right.
a variety of reasons. So that's number 2. One that I would recommend, that's the one that I recommend to keep in-house. It's the equivalent of product marketing position, as you were saying, right? Somebody that knows those differentiators, somebody that knows the value proposition for each persona, and then can overview whether the internal person that just started or an agency on, okay, well, who is that email campaign directed to? And then why are we highlighting that as the number 1 thing instead of this other? Because that's more of this persona, right? And well, the homepage, actually, the new website, let's focus more here and there. Like, to supervise the work channels, you need to know that, right? And it's really hard to outsource the business knowledge, internal business knowledge. So that's one that I'm all about outsourcing and finding obviously have to be the right partner, the right agency, but that it's definitely one you want to get it right internally.
Yes.
I also wanted to ask you, I know that we also discussed before, and it's an area that you're really good at. It's time management. That's something that I've struggled with. It's something that I know my team struggles with all the time, and it's for positive reasons, right? Everybody wants do a great job at everything, right? So obviously at some point, your bandwidth get maxed out, but like, what's your advice there, right? What has worked for you?
Yeah, in terms of time management, that is a great question. For myself, I think it's just a matter of, it can be really easy to go down a rabbit hole of maybe like a very minor task and things like that. So I think a couple things here that I practice. I think every day I like to think about, what is the thing that I am looking forward to doing, I guess, the least today. What am I dreading to do like today? It could be something that you have to get done, but it's not super fun, or it could be, just challenging, or whatever the situation is. Getting that done as soon as possible. So once you get the thing you've been dreading done with first thing in the morning, you feel so much better about your day and your productivity, and then you can move on from there. So that's one thing that I definitely recommend. Also, just leveraging different tools at your disposal. With AI, it's been like a complete game changer. So what are things that you can really leverage to help you? For example, like if I have to, send emails internally to different departments, and rather than getting hung up on like typing my email or proofreading my email, I like to leverage AI to proofread it, and it just makes it so much easier to get those out, get those sent. I don't have to get caught up on, did I say this quite right, like how I want to? So I think that's something. And then this is probably, I'm talking about AI now, I'm going to like go old school here, but I love keeping like a physical planner. I have mine right here, where I just have tasks. Yes. I love using technology, but like also physically having something where you can write down what's really, really important to get done for that day or week. That's always been super helpful to me. And again, I've tried to adapt to like Outlook tasks and to-dos and things like that. But my good old planner, it's my tried and true. It helps me get things done. And then also just in terms of time management, kind of going back to like outsourcing things again, like understanding what is important, what your expertise are, your bandwidth, what can you do to move the needle, what are things that are outside your purview that you can outsource, get that done with. So that also is kind of going to go into my answer of time management. I don't know if there's anything like earth shattering that I've revealed there, but
I think that valid points. I think that's one that it's also, I'm not rediscovering the wheel, reinventing the wheel, but I think checking your calendar and making sure your calendar, you don't have, I don't like to have more than 4 hours of meetings in one day. I think all of us, whether you are an entry-level specialist or a VP, we all need time to work on our own, even to prepare meetings, to prepare a story that we want to tell internally or to a client, to do some research, to read, and if you have 6-7 hours of meeting in a day, impossible, not only for time, but also for, your brain power. After, for example, this is my 3rd hour of meeting, I need to now disconnect for an hour.
right.
So I think that's a very common mistake. Now it's tough because you say, oh no, this meeting is important, that meeting is important, this meeting is important. Are those meetings that you're putting or that people are putting on you? One principle is that I not only use for myself but for the team is like people that are reporting to you cannot put meetings on you. It needs to be the other way around. You can, and then the concept of open hours, I think, has been really helpful for me, and I know the rest of the team. We say, okay, you have a question for me, my open hours in the week, and it could be 2, it could be 1 hour a day, it could be depending, right? But then forcing people to adapt to your calendar, that's another one that I think it's an underrated tactic, to free up.
Yeah, for sure. I also think leveraging, when I entered the workforce, instant like chat, like Teams chat or like Slack wasn't really a thing. So it was like email communication or a phone call or a meeting. And so I think now that there's like these, workplace chats, I really think that is super effective. If you have a question, And maybe it is for, somebody that's higher up in the organization that potentially has, a lot of meetings every day. I think leveraging a chat, like, I just have this really quick question. I just need them to answer this, or I just need them to proofread this thing, or take a look at this email I want to send out. Leveraging those chat tools, I think, is super, super helpful to get in front of maybe some of those people that their calendars tend to fill up rather quickly. And rather than, scheduling another meeting because I want them to proofread this copy, I think it's super, super helpful to use those chats, ping it over to them. In my experience, they get to it faster than looking at an email. The style of chat, it's a little informal, so you don't have to have this long-winded email on why I'm reaching out to you to proofread this. So I think leveraging those chat tools is super beneficial as well.
Paige, anything that I haven't asked that you want to share that you think would be valuable for people to hear?
I think just something that I have learned within the last 5 years is and it's so simple, but I think it bears worth being repeated. Always ask for help. I think sometimes people can get stuck in a role where they might think they have to know everything or know what to do. And so always ask for help, whether it's a peer, whether it's a leader in your organization, or just a leader in your industry, just reaching out, asking for help when you need it. I think that's just always important to keep in mind.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's one of those things that I don't know, maybe would train, to feel bad about asking.
Yeah.
And I think people do it when they don't ask for help.
Yeah.
For valid and positive reasons, but I agree. All right, Paige, well, thank you so much. Really appreciate the time. I enjoy the topics, and I'm sure people will too.
Awesome.
Thanks for listening to the Tailwind Marketing Podcast. If you enjoyed it, remember to subscribe for future episodes. Until next time.